the reason that this is a power that all of us, so far as we're human at all, so far as we do have psychic abilities, are capable of at some level or another. And it also stands to reason that the Masonic sorcerers would have developed this capacity to a very advanced degree, and that therefore they would be capable of creating thought forms, perhaps even by the million or by the billion. Before I proceed with this model, then let's cite another source, which is Carlos Castaneda. Carlos Castaneda wrote a series of books, 10 in all, not counting The Wheel of Time, which was a summary of his, or a compendium of quotes from the books after he died, I believe, or shortly before, and The Magical Passes, which was a load of bollocks, essentially a bunch of moves called tensegrity, with a few decent bits of text in between, but I won't even talk about that one. Otherwise, we've got the Teachings of Don Juan, the first book, which came out, I would guess, around 1961, and then we have the A Separate Reality, Journey to Ixtlan, Tales of Power, Second Ring of Power, The Eagle's Gift, The Fire from Within, Power of Science. Those were the first 8. There was a long period in which nothing was written, during which time Carlos Castaneda became, by degrees, more of a public figure, although he still didn't allow any photographs to be taken. He did allow this institute called Clare Green to grow up around him, and he did become something of a public speaker and guru. And it was during this period that the 9th book, The Art of Dreaming, came out, which is the book that I was going to cite, but I wanted to give the background because The Art of Dreaming is by far the worst of Carlos's books, and in fact I believe was not actually written by Castaneda, but was written by one of his apprentices based on the notes that Carlos had made during that time. And the reason I say this is because anyone who's read the books carefully or thoroughly would have noticed that it's a very different style to the other books. And what's remarkable about all the rest of the books is that they are impeccably written. The flow of ideas and the flow of the narrative is faultless. There is no the sort of cognitive dissonance of the bad kind when one is reading a novel that is poorly written, that takes one out of the action, out of the flow, because of poor use of grammar, metaphor, all the rest of it. Castaneda's books are the most seamlessly written works of fiction ever, and yet they're not fiction at all. They're actually fact, and so, or they're a form of fact, they're imaginal. They're reconstruction of imaginal fact in actual terms, so there are elements of fiction inevitably, just as if one were to transcribe one's dreams, one would have to paper over the cracks to make them flow as a first attention narrative. And Castaneda has basically done this. He's transcribed second attention experiences into first attention time narrative form, and so he's had to fictionalize to some extent, I believe, and this is why there are inconsistencies in the books, and why they're not anchored in actual first attention reality as many literal-minded people would require in order to credit the books at all. So they've been discredited for this reason, because they can be very easily, simply because they don't pertain to this reality to the same degree that most of our experiences do. Castaneda's stories, his tales, pertain to both the first and second attention, and he's not able to clearly map the bridge between these two realms, because he himself, I believe, never fully integrated the two sides of his consciousness, the self and the double, the other. And so the books seem to jump back and forth between 2 points of view without fully reconciling them, and that seems like inconsistency, and it is. But also the fact is that our lives Essentially what a sorcerer does is he awakens totality of memory, and he experiences himself as a fourth dimensional being, which is to say a being extended through time, from birth to death, and as such he becomes not a fixed object, physical object in time, but a flow of energy, a flow of consciousness through time. And this is experienced as being a tube, because one's consciousness, rather than being localized at this point in time, fourth dimensionally one's consciousness is extended through space, because of course we do move through space. So our consciousness is, from a fourth dimensional perspective, is a huge tube or tunnel that is made of light, consciousness, extending through space and through time, from the point of our birth to the point of our death. And this tube is made up of memories as such. And these memories include not only every event, action, thought, feeling of our lives, of our first attention conscious physical lives, but also of our dream lives. And the events, the memories of our dream lives are vastly, almost infinitely greater than those of our waking lives, as anyone who has even begun to tap the almost infinite reservoir of dreaming attention that we possess will know. In a single night we can access realms of experience and gather information that would seem to extend over a period of weeks. So this is true over years and years of dreaming, that essentially when we access those memories, when we access the totality, which very few ever do, and even Castaneda didn't succeed in doing, then we access the double, we enter into the totality of ourselves, and we become almost infinite. And it would seem to us from that perspective as if we had lived for thousands of years, as indeed we have. This is the totality of the self, and the reason I make this digression is because Castaneda was attempting to map this fourth dimensional consciousness, so it should come as no surprise that his books do lack a certain amount of consistency. But this is entirely irrelevant. For anyone who is able to drop out of the fixed, rational, literal mindedness and to let go of the hobgoblin of consistency and simply experience the books as explorations of awareness, it's clear that they are as authentic and as powerful and empowering as any books ever written. However, Art of Dreaming was written at a time when Castaneda was losing the plot, and he was losing his mind, as is evidenced by A Sorcerer's Apprentice, written by Amy Wallace about Castaneda in those last years. Even though the book is no doubt distorted and exaggerated view, I think that it's anchored in truth, and it does show that Castaneda did become deranged by the exposure to the power and the knowledge that the world of the sorcerers consists of, and it was more than he could handle, and it imbalanced him. And so during that time of madness, one of his apprentices took over, I believe, the writing of this book, and this is why it's such a poor book. Before I go into Art of Dreaming, I mention also that Active Side of Infinity, although it came out after Castaneda died, does have the flow and the poetry and the power and the beauty of his other books. So this would seem to refute what I've said, since it came out after he died, but I believe this was because he wrote the book much earlier, before Art of Dreaming indeed, but that he didn't allow it to be published until after his death, for two reasons. One was that it contained some personal